This is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast. I am your host, Matthew Cohen. On this episode of our podcast, I am pleased to welcome Tim Stewart, co-founder and COO of Exergenics. Founded in 2019, Exergenics developed a novel optimization methodology for chilled water plants that enables building owners and operators to save energy, reduce carbon emissions, and enhance building sustainability and performance. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, g'day, Matthew. Really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I wanted to talk about the work that you're doing now, but I'm always fascinated to kind of see how someone like yourself became interested in sustainability, especially the built environment space, and that's a very specific world to be in. How did you become interested in it? What was the genesis that got you involved in the industry in the first place?
Yeah, I think it probably started with a love of efficiency from a very young age from my brother and my dad. But yeah, we both studied a Bachelor of Environments at university, which is where I probably got exposed to it. It's quite a broad degree at Melbourne University, but ended up majoring in property. So that got a really good exposure to, I guess, the built environment, sustainable design practices, not so much sustainable operation practices, which is, where we're in now, but that was a really good place to cut the teeth and get a bit of an understanding of the industry and the space and the challenges that they face.
And I've never heard of the major in property. So that's just like real estate, or is that more the technical side of building efficiency?
Yeah, it was real estate focused. So a lot of that was focused on development and finance. But yeah, the degree itself was quite broad. It's a Bachelor of Environment, so you could kind of choose your interest early and then specialize. It's built to have a master's degree on top of it. Unfortunately, I never completed that, but thankfully my brother Ian did. He went on to do his Masters of Environmental Engineering, which is where I guess he got exposure to the tools that he used to build the initial version of Exergenics model. They was using a program called MATLAB, just to talk about how the business actually got founded. But this was the best part of a decade ago, using a program called MATLAB. And then, I guess dabbling in some newer tools in machine learning and optimization, and then was lucky enough to have an internship with one of the leading optimization companies out of Australia. And he saw, I think how the best in class were optimizing these systems. And really it was looking out of a library of pre-existing strategies and then, finding kind of the closest fit and applying that strategy to this building. And so he was able to get his hands on some data sets and build the initial version of the model, which, was really focused around whole of plant optimization. How can we use the chillers, the pumps and the cooling towers, which produce the chilled water to keep a building at temperature more efficiently. And so that's where he was able to build that first iteration of the tool, and then sat on that for the best part of a year or two before we went through an accelerator program and were able to start a business around it.
Yeah, and talk about those early days with Exergenics and kind of what the biggest challenges were, especially a startup in Australia. I know Australia has a really robust kind of built environment technology world. How did you navigate that? And I'm being more curious to hear not just that, but what the differences between what you face there and kind of what you face in the U.S. market. How did you ever navigate those early days to kind of separate yourself?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the market, you're spot on, is very, very mature in Australia. So a lot of, I guess, our prospective customers had been on their second, sometimes third iteration of trying a technology like this. And many had been burnt in the past. And there was a bit of an air, of some of these tools being a bit of snake oil. And often you'd hear of people coming in and tuning a chilled water plant and saving 20% on this side of the system, but then costing it, 20% on the other side of the system. So it was a difficult space to break into early days. But I think with the approach we had was quite different from a lot of other existing tools in the market, which we were able to generate a bit of interest there. But probably the tricky thing in terms of timing is we took the product to the market really in the peak of our COVID lockdowns in Australia, which was one of the most brutal globally. So, trying to convince people to look at these tools when they're they have a lot of other focus, or their plant is using 10 or 20% of what it would typically, because the buildings are empty. It was quite a difficult market to navigate in that respect. But the nice thing about Australia as a market for this tool is that the data collection and aggregation and normalization for these pieces of equipment is very advanced, compared to the rest of the world. So that's I think the driving factor of our product is we need the data to be able to do the work we do, and good quality data at that. So it was a great market for us to get exposure to a lot of data sets and a lot of already very efficient chilled water plants to kind of refine the model against. And then we were able to get traction, through a pretty diverse, mix of customers. A lot of higher education and commercial office was probably our biggest two markets out of Australia. There's some really good incentives as to, for the commercial office space in particular, to keep their buildings very, very efficient. And there's a high amount of competition in that market as well to keep everything, as efficient as it can be. And then, coming out to the States, we've been here for about a year and a half now, has been a different set of challenges. And I'll probably mention the word a lot during our conversation, but data has been a really key limitation for us, where, when you walk into a plant of a certain size in Australia, you can be relatively confident that the data set that we need to perform our analytics and optimization exists. Out here, it's a little bit more like the Wild West in the States as to where that data exists. So tracking down those sites and those owners, and partners of ours who have invested in that data infrastructure layer and have that base layer to then perform, this advanced supervisory control. It's been a little bit more difficult, but that's where I think we're working, have changed our strategy somewhat to have a lot more channel partnerships, and working through, a lot of partners who have access to that data already.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of go off the point of why the Australian market's so mature and what you've done. Is it more of a cultural thing that people just focus on sustainability and therefore the data is there, or it's hot in Australia and you have to do something? And so what was the catalyst there that can be replicated in other places that maybe aren't as mature?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, an element of it being hot, so that helps. But there's a real sustainability focus. I think it's it's on the tip of a lot of people's tongues. There are quite mature teams who are strictly sustainability teams who have existed for 10 plus years at a lot of the major real estate investment trusts. So it's quite mature in terms of their processes and how they evaluate and adopt technology. But a key driver has been more on a policy front. There's a program called Neighbours, which is essentially a star system for buildings. It started as energy. They've brought in water star systems and waste star systems, but the energy, obviously tends to be the focus for us. But this is, quite a strong incentive for building owners. It's a public list where you can see how that star, how that building is rated. And it's been around for, I think, almost 20 years now. So it's a very, very mature policy program. And it does incentivize building owners to really, invest in energy efficiency and water efficiency and waste efficiency. So a lot of the, tenants of these buildings are looking at that star rating as one of their deciding factors. And that's, it tends to be a ground up movement in Australia, where that's important to these tenants, employees and their own staff to be in a building that's efficient. And so, the major banks, for example, like to be in a 6-star energy efficient building, and government won't be in anything under 5 stars. So there's a kind of big portion of the market that becomes unavailable to you if you're under a certain efficiency, which really drives the investment in the space.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's a big part of what you're doing. So what I was curious about was, talking about your company's offering, specifically kind of how you've solved the efficiency gap in the operation of chilled water plants. I know that's a very niche space. It's definitely tough to overcome that efficiency gap. What have you done to really, what's your methodology that's really solved that?
Yeah, so it is a very difficult space. There's a lot of kind of different systems out there, but at a really high level, what we're doing is we take that centralized chilled water plant data. So we're looking at data from the chillers, pumps, and cooling towers, and we'll take the temperature, pressure, energy, and flow rate data from those systems. And what we're then using that data to do is model the efficiency of each of the pieces of equipment within that system. So the individual chillers, the individual pumps, and the cooling towers. And then essentially we build a digital twin of that system in our cloud with all the different efficiency curves from the different pieces of equipment. And we'll then essentially run that digital twin, simulate that in our cloud as if it's running in the field. And what that allows us to do, the simulation engine, which is probably the most powerful piece of the Exergenics model, allows us to essentially operate that plant and find, the outcome of that, the ideal control strategy for that system based on the efficiency curves of the pieces of equipment in the here and now. And where we can find a delta from, a consulting engineer is that they will typically use the OEM manufacturer specs in terms of efficiency for the pieces of equipment. But, once that equipment's been in the field for 5 or 10 or 15 years, that design documentation becomes less and less relevant over time. And then there can be quite a large delta in terms of what a perfect strategy looks like on paper based on the design documentation against what's actually happening in the field. The other, I think, key differential from Exergenics product to a lot of others out there in the market is how we actually deliver those controls to the owners or to the operators of that chilled water plant. We do have a SaaS model where we can tie in, to that plant remotely and push our controls in real time. But interestingly, what we've found is the majority of owners prefer to have those controls written into their existing building management system, living natively on the BMS. So in terms of how we're delivering the product, it is akin to what a consulting engineer will do with a set of recommendations that will be reprogrammed onto the existing controller. We can just do that a lot more efficiently than what a consulting engineer can do in terms of turnaround time. And we can have those controls being a lot more precise and custom built for that individual plant itself.
Yeah, and you talked about kind of the recommendations that you provide. And so what I'm always interested in understanding for someone in your position is where do you see the role in data and software as a service in the ecosystem of energy optimization? Because you can have a million points of data, but what do you do with it? How do you recommend it? Is it more about having skilled solutions people? Is it more about leveraging AI? I mean, what else has to be a part of that data set for it to be leveraged in the right way?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think ontology is key. How data is tagged. There's no kind of ubiquitous, this is how it's done across buildings. So even under the same ontology, you can get different tagging mechanisms. So being able to make sense of what that data is and know what that data is and be confident in that is really key for enabling the work that someone like us does. I think, you raise a really good point of, is this a skilled solutions engineer or is this something we can leave up to AI? There's probably a bridge in between. If we were to take a raw data set of a year's worth of historical data from a chilled water plant and drop that straight into our model, we're going to get a nonsensical result at the other end. So given the complexity of the systems and the amount of data and, the propensity for different sensors or meters to drift and need calibration, you do have to have some form of human oversight into looking into that data and making sure it makes sense to then be fed into, a machine learning algorithm or an AI algorithm to then produce that result. So at least from our standpoint, there is there's human oversight in the outset, but then it is model driven once, we're really confident that that data is really representative of what has been happening on site. Otherwise, there's a million and one data anomalies that can come out of that process. But I think another real key is, how is that being collected? So for us, I mentioned the data availability has been, a bit of an issue here in the States of getting through a process and then discovering that data doesn't exist. And, there might need to be some trending or trend logs set up with the historian on site to actually, produce that data set to then get value out of it. There are a lot of providers now, I think, who are focusing on, or increasingly some providers coming to market who are focusing on that data collection, aggregation, and normalization layer. And I think that's going to be really important and, key for driving a lot of businesses like ours who rely on that, but aren't necessarily experts at producing that data itself. So there's that bridge in between as well as to, is there a middle party who can warehouse this data, and then, third party point niche solutions, as you mentioned, then coming and getting value out of it at the other end.
Yeah, and beyond the data availability, now that you've been in the U.S. market for some time, I'd be curious to hear kind of what you think needs to happen to have a greater awareness for curbing carbon emissions in the built environment. I mean, we know 30% of all carbon emissions come from the built environment itself. What have you seen? Is it a policy thing that you've seen in other countries? I mean, let's be honest, I don't think we're going to see that in the next 4 years here anytime soon. So if not that, what is it more an ROI? Is it technology needs to catch up to certain areas of efficiency? What can be done to really bolster built environment efficiency that we're not doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is cognizant of it. I think it's known that it's an issue, and it's something that everyone's working towards to achieve. But I think you've mentioned the key acronym there, which is ROI, and that is front and center in every conversation. Obviously, we are highly focused on energy efficiency and optimization, so that's been our focus from day one. But increasingly, in those customer conversations, it's not about the additional bells and whistles. It's very much, what is the firm ROI based on this project and this product? And that, I think, as you point out, can be very, it can be assisted through some mechanisms. So I mentioned Neighbours out of Australia, which is a great mechanism for driving investment more broadly, but not necessarily at an individual project level. What we've seen here that I think is really interesting and is looking like it's getting more adoption is a lot of the utility incentive programs. So, for example, we are a pre-approved contractor for the Con Edison real-time energy management program, and that offers up to a 50% of project cost incentive to the building owner for taking on one of these technologies. And it's probably the most generous in terms of price per kilowatt hour. They give a 35-cent per kilowatt hour rebate based on the measured and verified savings. So for us and the level of savings we achieve, that's typically taking a payback period, a return on investment period for an owner from the 18 to 24 month mark down to the kind of 6 to 12 month mark. So it cuts it in half, which is really, really material for the owners. There are, I think the tricky thing across the States is that it operates, as everyone likes to say, like 50 little countries. So, there's time involved in getting pre-approved for the different states' utility programs, but we've found those to be very, very effective. And there's obviously, laws coming in places like New York as well, Local Law 97, that's on the tip of everyone's tongue at the moment with the first fines coming through, I think, this year. So people tend to be scrambling and looking at what that impact is going to be, and I think that will obviously then have that flow on effect to drive that investment.
Yeah, I mean, it is rough in time when you have to deal with all these different utility incentives, and every state has different regulations. On the flip side, if you can get into one and you can really corner that area, then you're in good shape. So we always recommend people to kind of really focus on where they can be most effective. But beyond kind of what you've been doing, what technologies do you see on the horizon that is kind of the next step in built environment efficiency? I mean, we're seeing obviously more AI algorithms be introduced. We're seeing more liquid desiccant HVAC systems. What's kind of the next frontier that you see that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it earlier, the independent data layer, and I kind of stepped through that process of that human oversight modeling at the beginning of our process and then being able to hand that over to a model-driven outcome. I think where I can see a lot of value and that I think will spawn a lot more of these niche type solutions and point solutions in the market is having an independent data layer that will, it has some form of smarts behind the aggregation and normalization of that data that it's taking in, and making that maybe not perfect to then feed directly into a model, but much closer to a perfect data set to then get value out of at the other end. I think the tricky thing for that, for that product type is how the value is pitched and who pays, which I think, we've spoken to a couple out there in the market, and some have the model of charging the technology provider at our end, which I think there's value in it for us. So I can see that. Others who are pitching it to the owner, but it comes back to that discussion of where is the ROI for the owner, and if they can't see that, pretty quickly, then it's kind of promising something into the future. But I do think, once that nut is cracked of the correct business model for applications in that space, I can see that then, making that data more available to a lot more parties, which I think will drive, some investment in the space for companies like ours that are point solutions in the space to extract that data and get real value out of it for the building owners.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that definitely we can get to that maturation level where you see those independent data sets. And so it's definitely excited what you're doing. In closing, anything else you want to add about what's going on now or upcoming with Exergenics that our audience should know and get excited about?
Yeah, I think we are releasing a version of our product that I think is really, really exciting. It's being tested in the market and has really changed the game for us in terms of how we deploy and how we find value for our customers. So yeah, there'll be a little announcement coming about that soon in terms of how that product looks. But I keep an eye on that, as well as some other announcements coming. We haven't been big on marketing historically. We've kind of been ground up, but yeah, there'll be quite a lot of partnership announcements coming up. So excited for that.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to put the link to your website in the description in the video. So again, Tim, thanks for taking time to do this. Really exciting what you're going to see in the future. So this is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast, and we will see you next time.